Yep, it's finally time for this. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the debut album from BT, Ima. Or I think it's Ima actually, but I keep, because it's Japanese for now, so I keep wanting to flip-flop between the two. Whatever. Yes, we're finally starting the next discography review, and it's the one and only Brian Tranceau. Can't guarantee this is going to be one that I'm going to get through quickly, half because we're getting near the end of the year and there's a lot of releases butting in for attention on top of Patreon requests. A crap ton of stuff I really want to cover right now, but the other reason the series is likely to be on the slow side is because BT is, to say the very least, quite the loaded topic. First and foremost, he's one of my favorite artists in all of electronic music. Top 5, easily, possibly even top 3, and for a long time I could mark him as my favorite solo artist in the entire genre, period. Less so now. Some weird goings on in the past year or so have killed off a fair bit of the pure fanboyism I used to have. Makes this a better time than ever to cover him, since I can look at him with a slightly more objective outlook. But even so, to this day, I still hold him and his music in extremely high regard. His music has meant so much to me over so many years, like I can't even begin to describe in a succinct way. I love the way he is always pushing forward in the genre and doing his own thing. Dude is mega talented. By the way, in these videos I'm going to be taking the credits in his albums at face value and leave it at that. Certainly there are some albums that have an absolute crap ton of names attached to them behind the scenes, but this isn't actually one of them. Brian Tranceau is in fact the one who wrote and produced every single one of the actual tracks on here, with some people coming in to help with mastering and engineering, namely these people, and a certain elephant in the room guest we'll get to as well. But yeah. Anyways, Ima is a fantastic trance album and kind of a classic. While I'm admittedly not up on my history of trance, and this album came out the year I was born, so I couldn't have been there to see it, but I'm told this was a pretty big game changer on the scene. Like, previously, the trance sound was a lot darker and more acid-heavy. We had our Goa stuff and all that, with artists like Juno Reactor and others. But what Ima brought to the table was something a lot more uplifting and refreshing, perhaps a tad new age-ish, but not in a cheesy or pretentious way. That album cover is fitting for the kind of sound this was adding to the trance sounds of the time, like it shows a statue of Jesus Christ underwater with his arms raised towards the sun. And it really is the kind of thing that feels like a spiritual uplifting. Like, this was pre-Robert Miles. We didn't have that soaring high sound quite yet, and this early BT stuff really helped kick that stuff off in a big way, even if he doesn't deliver on the giant emotional highs that Robert Miles later could. BT was just being BT, making the dance music he wanted to make, and it really caught on. And yeah, big surprise, I love this album as well. Fair warning, there's not going to be much of anything I'll be covering in this series I don't think is great, but never mind that. So, yeah, individual tracks. I'm going by the standard version you can currently hear on Spotify because it's the version I'm used to, the one with just 5 tracks. Technically, 5 tracks. There is an alternate expanded edition of this album, a double disc version that also has several alternate versions of other tracks. There's 2 there called Poseidon and Blue Skies featuring Tori Amos that aren't on my version of the album. They're pretty good, but I'm focusing my efforts on the standard edition. So, the album starts with 3 tracks presented purely in their original state in the way that BT intended them, being Nocturnal Transmission, Quark, and Tripping the Light Fantastic. There's an entire 42-minute DJ set called Sasha's Voyage of Ima, assembled by, of course, Sasha, and including not only the 3 tracks that started the album in various parts, but also early singles of BT such as Embracing the Future, Deeper Sunshine, and 2 different versions of Loving You More featuring Vincent Cavello. And there's a 5th track, Divinity, at the end as well. Personally, I don't think you really needed much more than the latter 2 tracks, and Sasha's Voyage of Ima contains pretty much everything that came before it and ties it up in a neat package. Really tight and well-executed mix there. But if more attention was meant to be given to those first three, I guess that works too, since that is a really solid set of tracks. I have admittedly been sitting on this review for a couple of weeks thanks to not being able to come up with an adequate description for these first three tracks, but they all have plenty of progression to keep you interested from start to finish, lots of elements coming and going but still leaving an impression on you, going from watery and smooth to a bit acidish, and back and forth between those kinds of vibes, constantly keeping up a really strong and compelling groove. Of the three, Nocturnal Transmission is probably my favorite, if nothing else because it has the most substance. It goes for 8.5 minutes on my version, or 9 minutes on other people's versions, and those four voices stick in my head pretty easily. But all the acid synths of Quark are a lot of fun too, and Tripping the Light Fantastic has a lot of fun and refreshing moments too. The chopped up, wavy voice samples stuck out to me in particular. Yeah. The latter is probably my least favorite moment on this album, since my version just ends with an abrupt cutoff. It sounds like it was ready to transition into something else entirely and didn't get the chance to. And the way the next track starts with all the nature ambience makes it sound like it should have been the place to start in the album, but whatever. But yeah, Sasha's Voyage of Ima is where the meat of this album lies. I suppose you don't get everything in the previous three tracks, so if you wanted those stretched out to their full extent, they're still here to fully enjoy. But I like hearing them more in this giant continuous mix. The whole thing has always sounded like a single 42-minute track to me, and I have only just recently been able to identify where the tracks began and ended, and that the previous tracks were in the mix in the first place. I mean, it's pretty obvious now. Like, for instance, you can pretty easily tell where Quark starts and hear the But when I first heard this album in high school, this was basically just one super long track, and one that I enjoyed from start to finish and was never bored by at any point, even back then. Embracing the Future and Deeper Sunshine are super light and refreshing, and the latter in particular has really uplifting chord progression and sparkly melodies that really stick out as memorable. Probably the highlight of this mix, though, is Loving You More. It takes up a big chunk of the mix, like 20 minutes or something, through multiple versions being strung together. And as mentioned above, it's mainly notable for having vocals provided by Vincent Cavello. I remember reading some interview somewhere with BT talking about how some of his friends or family or whatever were telling him it probably wouldn't make sense to have vocals in tracks like these, since they always had so much going on already, and he took that as a challenge. It seems so weird to think about that there was ever a time when someone listened to trance music and thought, oh, this doesn't make sense to have vocals, since you're very rarely going to find popular trance music these days that doesn't have vocals. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if BT wasn't actually the first one to the idea, given how he likes to exaggerate his accomplishments sometimes. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he was the first one to the idea. If nothing else, he was one of the first. I can't think of much around the time that did sound like the stuff that he did. Though, like I mentioned before, I'm not super up-to-date on my history of trance music. Whatever. What's more important is that the various vocal hooks on Loving You More are super catchy. I'm loving you more. Probably took some influence from the surrounding house and rave scenes. Actually, this entire track might qualify more as progressive house rather than trance, actually, but I don't know. Don't quote me on that. This track is also why I tend to get the urge to pronounce this album Ima rather than Ima. Like, there's a part where you hear Cavello saying, I know he's not actually saying Ima, but you know what I mean. It just does lead me to think that's what he's saying. Oh, and did I mention that the actual mixing between tracks is excellent? I mean, there may be multiple moments where I can hear the audio flanging and going out of phase a bit as a side effect of having really long crossfades, but I mean, the flanging does fit aesthetically with the sound of these tracks, and I can't help but notice what a cool move it was to have, for instance, the vocals of Loving You More just play over the first 2-3 minutes of Nocturnal Transmission, and for all the elements of that track to mix in so well with Tripping the Light Fantastic. It's very well done. So I think I've praised Sasha's Voyage of Ima enough. You'd assume from the amount of things I have to say about it that it's my favorite part of the album, right? Well, close, but no. The actual honor for my favorite track on this album goes to the album's closer, Divinity. Easily the track on here I listen to the most, and the one where description comes the most naturally to me. I suppose if you're looking for more of the danceable grooves, Divinity might not be as big a highlight to you, because the actual beat is much more subtle than everything that came before, and never really delivers the same kind of tightness that the rest of the album does. Divinity is my favorite though, because to me it's the emotional climax of the album. The pianos and string pads and delicate little guitars, and other sounds in the beginning, the long stretch of those smooth, acidy bass synths, the chopped up vocal samples near the very end, and good god, especially the piano breakdown at about the 8-minute mark is so incredible I have no words. Easily my favorite part of the album. Every sound in Divinity is super memorable and left a super strong impression on me. Like, BT clearly ended with this track for good reason. It may be more subtle than other moments on here, but the emotional power is even stronger here than anywhere else. So yeah, that's Ima. Now, it's not BT's best work by any stretch. I think the sounds explored on this album would be further improved upon on his next album, ESCM, and this one's quality is centered a lot around someone else's DJ mix. There's plenty of quality to be found in the first 3 tracks, but more often than not, I usually just skip right to Divinity or sometimes Sasha's Voyage of Ima and don't listen to the full package as often as those last 2. But Ima is undoubtedly a trance classic. Even to this day, it still has its own unique sound that sounds fresh and uplifting and maybe new agey, but never cheesy or overblown. I don't know what else to say. It's only the beginning of the long journey BT's gone on and only shows some of the promise he'd further capitalize on. But this is a great album all the same, and I'm overall feeling an 8.3 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.